So welcome everyone. My name is Ayan Mohammed and I'm the European Marketing Manager here at DataXu sitting in London. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar called Deconstructing Ad Fraud, Insights, Impact and Best Practices for Marketers, featuring Rory Edwards of DataXu and Aaron Doze of DoubleVerify. So if there's one thing you should take away from today's webinar, it's that you need a plan to fight ad fraud. As you'll hear later from Rory and Aaron, fraud is a tough and growing issue, but by understanding the impact and finding the right partner to help solve this problem, there can be a resolution. Our goal in the next 45 minutes or so is to give you the knowledge and the confidence you need to take that journey. Before we get started, I've got a few tiny housekeeping items. You'll all be in listen-only mode to cut down on the background noise. The webinar control panel can be opened and closed by clicking on the small red arrow button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you have any questions at all during the webinar, please send them into the question and answer box, which is also found on the right-hand side of your screen. The webinar today is also being recorded, and we'll send you an email with a link to the recording early next week. So with that, a brief introduction to some of our speakers today. Rory Edwards is the product owner who ensures DataXu's media supply chain meets the quality standards that our customers expect and deserve. Prior to DataXu, he worked in strategic roles at Digitas and the Boston Consulting Group, where he focused on the topics of digital media and technology. Aaron Doze is the head of media quality and fraud protection services at DoubleVerify, the industry's leading provider in digital media authentication. Aaron's previous company, Real Targeting, was actually acquired by DoubleVerify in 2014. So a quick look at our agenda today. Rory will kick it off with by looking at how we got here and what the real financial impact of fraud is on our industry. Aaron will then help level set us so we can have a common understanding of the general problem. He and Rory will then take us through some of the real impact that fraud has on key KPIs that are important to us as marketers, along with some real data examples. We'll then finish off the webinar with some best practices and provide an overview of how DoubleVerify and DataXu are approaching this issue. So without further ado, I'll turn the session over to Rory now.
Perfect. Thanks, Ayan. And thanks, Aaron, for joining us today. As Ayan mentioned, I'm the GM of Media Quality at DataXu. So fraud's a topic that I've spent quite a bit of time on. I'm excited today to talk in depth about it and think there's going to be some great information and insights for everyone who's listening, regardless of how much you all know about ad fraud. So jumping right in, it's been clear for some time that there is a fraud problem in digital advertising. From the stories of security firms taking down sophisticated botnets, perspectives from brands that are getting increasingly fed up with the issue, the problem's persistent, and unfortunately for us, it only seems to be getting worse. So why is there fraud in digital advertising? Well, the truth is that fraud's been a large problem in other industries for decades, but as we're shifting more and more to a digital economy, the opportunity for fraudsters has also shifted from the physical world in the form of bank robberies, pirate operations, and counterfeiting, and if we could build this slide up, to the digital world in the form of phishing attempts, email scams, and now digital ad fraud. So there's a huge amount of money at play here, and at the same time, this type of fraud can be perpetrated from anywhere in the world and often has much lower risks for the fraudsters. And for these reasons, we're seeing a huge amount of activity in ad fraud, with the estimates showing billions and billions of dollars being wasted as a result of this problem. But where do we find the fraud in the ad tech value chain? Well, the reality is that fraud is everywhere, and it's just a matter of how much there is in any given ad inventory source. As you can see here, whether it's buying through ad exchanges, ad networks, or directly from publishers, there are significant risks of fraud impacting your advertising spend. Per DoubleVerify, publisher direct buys can have up to 7% ad fraud, ad networks up to 17%, and exchanges up to 30%. Unfortunately, there hasn't been as much resolute action to address fraud on the supply side as we'd like to see. So this problem is essentially being passed through the value chain to the buy side today. And while a majority of fraud has historically been seen in desktop display, due to basically the large amounts of ad budgets that have been allocated there so far, budgets are beginning to shift into mediums and new channels. So fraudsters are continuing to follow that money. And as you can see by the chart, for example, video has already become an area with significant activity and significant dollars. And the high CPMs seen in video mean that fraud's going to have an even bigger dollar impact. And you can see bots and drone pools, these types of things are being used to focus on video. It's also clear that consumer behavior is shifting more and more to mobile every year, and while the ad spend hasn't quite shifted as quickly, it's expected to do so very rapidly in the coming years. Again, fraudsters are aware of this trend, and they're already creating new methodologies for perpetrating fraud in the mobile channel, things like spoofing device IDs, even running mobile emulators in cloud computing data centers to capture a share of this mobile ad spend. So we should all expect more investment by fraudsters in the mobile channel going forward. Also note that these are U.S. data points as far as the spend here by channel, but this is really a global trend. And advertisers around the world are going to be impacted. Maybe it's a little bit different timing. It may be a little bit later in the EU or APAC, or maybe it's actually earlier in the APAC with a higher focus on mobile. But regardless of where you are, this trend is going to hit you at some point. And fraudsters, they can have global operations very easily. So it's important for everyone to be cognizant of these risks. So moving on, what does this truly mean for advertisers? And when I think of this, I think of these three topics really: waste, distraction, and noise. So we're all, I think, well aware that there are wasted advertising dollars that are lost to fraud, as purchase ad impressions are being shown to bots, or they're being placed on the sites that an advertiser would never want to be seen on. But there are other impacts too aside from this. Distraction to me is a huge issue. Advertisers are spending a large amount of time worrying about fraud, trying to understand if they're impacted, putting in place solutions, and monitoring those solutions to make sure that they're working. This is time that I think could and should be spent focused on other aspects of a brand's advertising strategy. The last one here, noise. So in the form of excessive click rates, low conversion rates, this is a big impact that's not often given enough weight. The noise that fraud adds to the KPIs prevents marketers from being able to truly understand performance and effectively optimize their advertising activities. In the worst scenario, advertisers are actually optimizing toward fraudulent activities because they appear to be performing better, though in reality this is just false performance. So I often like to start fraud discussions by aligning on the concept of ad fraud and how that's different from other inventory quality metrics like viewability and brand safety. Ad fraud is an ad impression that has no chance of being seen by a human or is misrepresented to increase its value in the market. Every advertiser would agree that fraud is bad and undesirable and should never be offered for sale by a publisher to an advertiser. Viewability, on the other hand, is when an impression is visible to a human on a web browser for an appropriate amount of time. Just because an impression isn't viewed doesn't mean it's fraudulent. Simply, it might have been a placement on a page that a particular consumer didn't go to. This concept was applicable to TV and print advertising too. For example, if a consumer chose not to read an article and therefore didn't see an ad that was on a page within that article, it would have been a non-viewable ad. So this has been around for a long time in the advertising world, and it's transferred directly to digital, and that's not fraud necessarily. So brand safety is the concept when an impression does not appear in a context that would damage the advertiser's brand perception. That's when it's considered brand safe. So this one is more of a normative concept. So the idea of what's safe for one advertiser may be different from another advertiser. The example to think of here is an alcohol company who doesn't want to advertise on YouTube Kids channels, but toy makers, however, find that to be a perfectly suitable place to advertise. Different perceptions, different brand safety criteria. So with that overview, I'll hand it over to Aaron, who's going to provide a deeper dive on the types of ad fraud that exist.
Thanks, Rory. Just to briefly reintroduce myself, I'm Aaron Dodds, Vice President of Digital Quality Solutions at DoubleVerify, and I'm responsible for the company's fraud detection and prevention services, as well as other aspects of impression quality. DoubleVerify authenticates the quality of digital media for the world's largest brands by ensuring ads that are brand safe, fraud-free, and viewable. Today, alongside Rory, I'll be discussing the various types of fraud, how and why bots behave the way they do, and how bots impact various verticals. So there are two major areas where fraud occurs that advertisers need to contend with, and that's domain-based fraud and user-based fraud. The first type, that's domain or site-based fraud, is when the website owner or operator is knowingly engaged in fraudulent practices that seek to inflate impression counts or hide the true location of the ad unit. The three main types of site fraud are hidden ads, stacked ads, and impression laundering. The first two, hidden ads and stacked ads, are both fairly straightforward. So hidden ads is when a site owner is loading an ad tag or multiple ad tags into a one-by-one iframe so that the ad tag is technically loading but can't actually be seen by the user. Stacked ads are when a site owner loads a bunch of ad tags, one on top of another. So again, the ad tags are loading, but only the top ad will have the opportunity to be seen by the user. The final form, and the most sophisticated and profitable form of site fraud, is impression laundering, which DoubleVerify uncovered 2 years ago and still sees as a very widespread issue today. Impression laundering is when two sites are working together to hide the true location of the ad. They use a practice called URL masking, where the owner of a site with low advertiser interest, so imagine a copyright infringement site or any site where advertisers really don't want to appear, will mask the location of the ad call to make it look like the impression is actually appearing on a totally clean site in order to dupe advertisers. They leverage what are called front sites that make the ad call, but in reality, these sites have no real users. They're just laundering the traffic from the undesirable copyright infringement sites instead. The only way to solve for this type of fraud is to work with a company that can block the impression when it's occurring in real time. However, the most sophisticated type of fraud overall, and probably the one that everyone on the line has heard about the most, is non-human traffic, or bot fraud, where the user itself is fake. This is also the most difficult to catch because of the efforts undertaken by the fraudsters to make the users blend in with real traffic. In fact, they go to extreme lengths to masquerade as real users. As Rory mentioned before, botnet operators make money by selling clicks or visits to publishers who think they're buying legitimate traffic. In order for a bot to appear both valuable to advertisers and as a real user, they need to fake actions and behavioral attributes to try and throw detection efforts off their trail. So when a bot's first created, it doesn't look like any other user. That's not great for botnet operators because no one's going to want to spend money to advertise to a user that they know nothing about. So a bot might be sent to a number of sites. As you can see here, there are fashion, beauty, and other women's content that will lead data aggregators to conclude that the user is in fact a woman with a nice household income that's interested in a range of products. The data aggregators then place the user into these respective buckets, but that's not enough. Not only does the bot want to appear to be a normal user, they also want to appear valuable with the intent to buy. So then the bot is sent to e-commerce and other advertiser sites, where the bot interacts with specific products, looks up sizes, colors, adds items to shopping carts, all in order to get retargeting pixels from advertisers, with the ultimate endpoint being a bot-driven website where they can steal advertisers' budgets. Additionally, bots interact extremely well on sites to blend in with legitimate traffic and avoid detection. So they'll click on links in a semi-randomized fashion to try to not appear suspicious. They'll click on random ads, random links within the site itself, so it looks like the user isn't really up to anything malicious. They'll scroll up and down to trigger interactivity with a lot of different elements on the page itself, and they'll actually spend a fair amount of time on the site. If you saw a user come to your site, click 15 links, and then scroll at a hyperspeed and leave all within a few seconds, you'd know something was up. As a result, bots take their time and make themselves look as attractive as possible to traffic buyers. Now I want to turn it back over to Rory, who's going to dive in on how all of this directly impacts campaign KPIs.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron. So I had spoken earlier about the concept of noise and KPIs, and I just want to illustrate how that plays out in reality. So what we can see here is a conversion funnel for two campaigns, one on top, which has no fraud protection in place, and on the bottom, where they're serving only to real humans. As you can see, they both start out with equivalent number of impressions. However, for the fraud campaign, we see that there's a higher click-through rate with more of those impressions resulting in a click and a landing page visit. So in this case, looking only at the metrics, it would appear that the top campaign is performing better than the bottom. However, if you're looking at the number of real humans who visit the advertiser site, you can see that that isn't the case. Now, as we move from landing page visit to conversion, this is where the bots start to have trouble mimicking the behavior of real humans, such as filling out a form. So we could build out this slide. So when you move past that click-through rate type of metric, and you look at a conversion such as a form fill-out, you can see here that you're going to see better results without fraud. And the key benefit to removing fraud is that the advertising spend held equal. The more real humans you get in the top of your funnel, the more true conversions you're going to have at the bottom of your funnel. So as you can see here, it looks like that initial click-through rate from the ad to the landing page is higher for the fraudulent campaign. But once you get down to that sign-up form, we're getting, in this example, which is illustrative, twice as many real humans that move through to that point. And then in the end, when we have that purchase, we're actually getting twice as many conversions as we are with that fraud campaign, all simply because we're targeting more real humans from the start. So by removing fraud, you're not only removing waste, but you're going to improve the performance of your advertising efforts. This is what at DataXu we call the true performance of a campaign. So the last slide was illustrative, but late last year at DataXu we ran tests across over 20 campaigns from more than 10 advertisers, and we saw exactly these results. So we saw that after removing fraud, click-based metrics look close to 30% worse because bots easily do that. However, the deeper conversions, such as the CPAs that had some form of deeper action that couldn't be mimicked by a bot, improved by nearly 20% on average. This is why, in general, at DataXu we consider click-based metrics to be poor indicators of performance because they can easily be swayed by fraud, and we recommend deeper actions to get a read on true performance. In the context of fighting fraud, this to me is a tremendous result and makes a pretty clear case for the ROI on removing ad fraud from your campaigns as soon as possible to get access to that better CPA. So let's look at one even deeper dive, a case study on automotive advertiser. So here's an example where this auto advertiser, we're showing basically the change in CPA over time when we did some testing and drove down the fraud rate, which is that red dashed line, from 28% to 9%. So you can see, we get it down pretty significantly, but there's still room for more improvement because we're ending at 9% fraud. But when you look at the CPA, we can see that it drops from initially $1,400, and in this case, this was a form fill-out CPA, and it drops down to just over $300. So that's an incredible improvement, 75% reduction in cost per action simply by filtering out fraud from the top of the funnel. And you're not going to see this on every campaign for every advertiser, but I think it illustrates just how much value that there can be and that could be being lost today because of spending money on bots and other types of fraud. So moving to the next slide, that example that we just spoke to was focused on autos, and it's true, we've seen higher rates of fraud in the auto vertical than others. However, the reality is that fraud impacts everybody. As you can see here, even the low fraud verticals have 8 to 9% fraud, which is an unacceptable amount of wasted ad spend for any advertiser. This is also a snapshot in time of what the fraud rates look like by vertical, and fraud is changing all the time. So where it's low one month, it may be the focus the next. So it's very important for every advertiser to be aware of this and to be vigilant and not to feel that you're just in a place that's not affected by fraud, because I don't think that place really exists. So now I'll hand it back over to Aaron, who will talk a bit more about this vertical piece and how bots are actually adapting and moving from vertical to vertical.
Okay, thanks, Rory. So, as Rory just mentioned, fraud really does affect all verticals, all channels. One way of seeing that firsthand is to look at a group of bots that DoubleVerify has been tracking for over a year. So this particular group is very targeted and deliberate in the verticals they've been going after, and it's actually really interesting to see how they've been changing their appearance over time. So about a year ago, in April of 2014, we saw this group of bots making themselves look like they were gearing up for the summer. So they were researching new grills, gardening tools, lawnmowers, flowers. They were also associating themselves with the baby boomer segment. 6 months later, we saw this same group all of a sudden become very interested in high-end travel in anticipation of winter breaks. And they also started demonstrating interest in autos for year-end clearance sales. It was very interesting to note here that they were interested in all types of autos, so from luxury to SUV to compact to hybrids. The general auto intender obviously would not be interested in all different types of cars, but these bots obviously saw an opportunity to steal some major auto budgets. We looked at this group one more time when we were preparing for this webinar, and we saw that once again they're interested in spring items like grills, but now they're also interested in investment products aimed at senior citizens, like retirement accounts, specific types of life insurance, and even wealth management products. The main takeaway here is that the folks who run the botnets know exactly what they're doing. They control every action each bot does down to the click, and they'll change the appearance of their respective bot groups over time in order to target the advertising budgets they perceive to either be the biggest or most vulnerable at any point in time. So we know this sounds all pretty scary. So what should advertisers be doing to protect themselves? So the first and the most important thing is to stop bots where they're actually occurring, so block them in real time. You should also enlist fraud protection services that have a layered approach. For your programmatic and guaranteed buys, it's kind of similar to having locks on your house, an alarm, and a security system should someone get through one of the previous layers of protection. You should ask for transparency from your media partners to see what they're doing to combat fraud. Sounds kind of obvious, but having that conversation with your partners goes a long way to see who is taking it seriously and who is just paying lip service. You should select partners that are all in, partners that have publicly announced a commitment to solving for fraud, like DataXu, that have a vested interest and will act accordingly to protect their clients. Finally, you should also just understand your marketing KPIs. You should employ marketing and remarketing strategies that ensure that you're not relying on fraud-polluted data. So we get asked all the time, what should I be looking for in a fraud vendor to work with? First, I suggest starting with their methodology. So you should ask the tough questions. Are you flagging for merely suspicious activity, or do you employ a more deterministic approach? How often are you flagging users, and how long does it take for you to recognize a bot? Do they have an established presence? So ask, how long have you been doing this? Has it been vetted by a reputable third-party company? Is it proprietary technology that's being used, or is it open source technology that's also available to the bad guys? What types of fraud are you detecting? Is it both site fraud and bot fraud, or simply one or the other? How do you handle fraudulent impressions across your other metrics? Do you remove fraud from viewability metrics? And can you block for fraud? If so, where and how are you blocking? These are all critical components to choosing an effective fraud prevention solution, and that's why DoubleVerify is all in on fraud prevention. We have a dedicated fraud lab that has been in market for over 6 years that solves for the entire range of site fraud as well as the most sophisticated forms of non-human traffic. DoubleVerify bot fraud detection uses a deterministic approach. When we say it's a bot, we know it's a bot. We block both site and bot fraud at a user or impression level, which means that your campaign will maintain its scale while only removing those bad impressions. And as I said before, DoubleVerify recommends layers of protection. DV Fraud Protection Suite of services are available in various pre-bid platforms, and we can block at serve time for any bots that try to sneak in. Lastly, we have major partnerships across the ecosystem, such as with DataXu, that fully support our mission to build a better industry. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Rory.
Great, thanks, Aaron. So, lately I've been getting questions about what it takes to successfully manage and defeat fraud. And after spending nearly a year investigating, planning, and then implementing our fraud protection system at DataXu, we feel we truly have defeated fraud to the point that our customers shouldn't need to worry about it. And here's a quick overview of what we did, a little bit in the weeds on how we're protecting against fraud. So we employ a defense in depth approach, which is a concept that originated in the IT security world, where the belief is that there's no single prevention mechanism that would be enough to block all malicious activity. And so the better approach is instead to layer on multiple protection techniques. We use 5 distinct filters. The bot filter is at the user level. So you can protect against bots anywhere, even on premium publisher sites, without sacrificing scale and performance you get from those sites. So you can look at each individual user, and you can decide whether or not to buy or to not buy because you think they're a bot. The site filter is used to identify and block publishers who've been creating fake content or misrepresenting content to ensure our customers don't even see that inventory for their campaigns and that they're not going to buy anything that we know to be site fraud. We also have a real-time suspicious activity prevention filter, which basically automatically detects and implements pre-bid blocking based on the signals we're getting from the market. So if we see, for example, bid requests come in for one single user and there are hundreds of them within a second. That's pretty suspicious, so that's the type of thing that we would just block in real time. The malware filter is just simply something to make sure we don't propagate fraud into the ecosystem. So we scan every creative to make sure that there's no chance that they're infected by malware or would perpetrate that back out into the ecosystem. And then finally, the content blocking is to avoid sites that are known to be under construction, known for piracy and other categories that are highly correlated with site fraud. And basically, the advertisers wouldn't want to be on anyway. So all of this protection, these 5 layers, 5 filters, are integrated into our platform. They're in a pre-bid format. It's fully automated, so nobody needs to worry about that if you're using our platform. And it comes at no cost to our customers. And when we decided to tackle the problem of ad fraud, we chose to offer a solution to fraud rather than simply offering tools to our customers. So our goal with this approach is really to free our customers from each having to spend their time, energy, and budget dealing with fraud and instead to focus on their core objectives. So that's why we decided to put down the 97% fraud-free guarantee and put DataXu's own money on the line here just to show our customers that we were serious about solving this problem on their behalf. So this guarantee states that if a customer experiences a fraud rate greater than 3% in a given month, we'll refund all the DataXu fees associated with that excess fraudulent spend. And we're going to also go after the suppliers of the media to try to reclaim money and return that to our customers. The guarantee is available to all of our customers. It's across all geos and channels and requires no action. We've been doing this since the beginning of 2015, so I think we're a little over 3 months in now. We've paid out probably on the order of 30 or so, 30-plus claims with real money behind them. But overall, we've been able to manage our fraud levels to that 3% platform-wide. There are some hot spots, and that's why we have to pay out claims. But we're continuously monitoring this and making sure that we keep fraud as low as possible across our platform. So we truly feel this is the best anti-fraud offering with all the protection and the guarantee that's available in the industry today. And we're really happy with how it's played out after putting about a year of effort into figuring out the right way to approach fraud. So we've reached the end of our webinar now, and I wanted to summarize a few key insights to take away and some next steps to put you on a path to defeating ad fraud. So what to know about ad fraud? I think we all know fraud's a massive issue, but it's important to recognize that it's agnostic to vertical, channel, and publisher. Regardless of who the advertiser is, you're going to have to think about fraud. Even if you're doing only premium direct buys, you're still at risk. So important to know that. Second, fraud impacts the ability to gauge true performance. It's not just about wasted ad dollars. It's also about knowing where your ads are performing better and being able to effectively optimize your campaigns and remove that noise and focus on true performance. But finally, it's not all bad news. Fraud is a problem that can be solved and minimized to a point where you don't have to worry about it. So, what do you need to do and what steps can you take today to solve the problem? First, we say be aggressive. One of the biggest things that we did at DataXu on the sort of path to figuring out how to beat fraud was making the decision that we were going to do it. And we just had to decide that we were all in on solving the problem and make that commitment to ourselves. And that's when we really put all the pieces together to solve this problem. So I would say the same thing for any advertiser. Make the decision that you're going to solve this problem and just be aggressive about that. Second, ask questions. Find a partner that you really trust. As Aaron was mentioning, ask questions of their technology, talk to multiple partners to understand the differences and really figure out who's covering you against all types of ad fraud and in the best possible way. And also make sure that it's an organization that has good customer service that can support your business, because that's also a really critical part, given that fraud is unlikely to go away anytime soon, and it's going to continue to evolve, so there's going to be new things coming up all the time. Finally, embrace change. When it comes to that idea of true performance, you need to be open to redefining your success metrics. So if you rely heavily on click-based metrics, you need to understand that if you block all fraud, you will likely see a decline in those metrics. But you should understand that that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just giving you a view into what the true performance actually is. And if you focus on things like CPA with actions that are deeper, then you're going to see an improvement there most likely. And I think that's going to be your best way to really focus on true performance and understand, where you're spending in an effective manner, regardless of fraud. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ayan, who's going to moderate some Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Rory and Aaron. That was really interesting. I'd now like to open this up to our question and answer session. So if you have a question, please use the questions box located in the GoToWebinar console. And if you also have any follow-up questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to Rory and Aaron directly. I'll be sharing their email addresses in a minute. So let me see. There's a few questions that came in during the webinar. The first one here, which is probably for Aaron, is I noticed automotive had the highest fraud rate. What is the reason for that? Are they doing something different?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So the biggest reason is that automotive is a fairly competitive vertical online. So each of the big autos typically is fighting for share of voice for their target audience. But also, aside from the concept of fraud follows the money, so the high CPMs are what draws the fraudsters to autos. But most of the conversion metrics for autos are on-site activity. So it's very easy for a bot to click on an ad, interact with a bunch of different objects on a site, and then it looks like a conversion to the auto manufacturers and advertisers. So as a result, it will look like the bot audience is actually highly desirable, and they accidentally optimize towards them.
Okay, thanks for that. Another one over here is maybe one for Rory. You mentioned that fraud is different from brand safety and viewability, but is there ever a time when they do interact?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's true. They're different concepts, but there are some interaction points. So as we said, viewability is the concept is an ad that's viewed by a person for a specific amount of time. So obviously, if there's an ad that's seen by a bot or is hidden behind another ad, it's clearly not going to be viewed by the end user. So the NRC states that any fraudulent impression should not be considered viewable. This may or may not be reflected in your viewability metrics today, and it really depends on whether the vendor you're using is able to detect fraud, or if they focus only on viewability, so they're sort of able to turn a blind eye to that fraud issue. So I would say be sure to ask your viewability vendor about this if you already have one, or if you're looking, that's a good question to ask to make sure you're getting a full read on what's viewable, but not only per that 1 second, 50% of the pixels kind of definition, but also focus on real humans at the end who are viewing it. The other one, brand safety. Yeah, sorry, just to continue. The brand safety topic also has some interactions. So fraud kind of often impacts here in the form of ads that appear on brand unsafe content, even though you've got brand safety protections being in place. So this tends to happen due to the impression laundering concept that Aaron mentioned, where the URL is masked on the exchange. So it might look like it's something perfectly safe. And the New York Times, for example, might be the domain that shows up there, but in reality, that's sort of a fake domain name, or there's a front site that seems safe, but the actual bid that you're putting in is ultimately going to be filtered through to some sort of unsavory content that would be considered non-brand safe. So your pre-bid protections may think that they're buying something that fits within your constraints for brand safety, but in the end, you're being sort of fooled by the fraud component and ending up somewhere you don't want to be. So I'd say, that's another reason why it's important to make sure you have fraud protection in place, to make sure when it comes to viewability and brand safety that you're really getting robust protection and robust measurement in place. Otherwise, you might have some gaps there.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. And here's another one, maybe one for Aaron again. So you showed a daisy chain earlier on one of your slides. Could you explain how a premium publisher can still end up with fraud?
Yeah, absolutely. We get asked that question all the time. So there's two ways that it happens. So the first way, and it's very unfortunate for the premium publishers, is that, like we said, bots don't really look like anything when they're first created. So the way that they make themselves look both real and valuable is to send themselves to premium publishers where they know that data collection is taking place. So they know that if they visit a bunch of finance websites, the data aggregators will assume that the user is interested in finance or maybe has a high household income, and as a result, finance advertisers will pay a premium to reach them. So the bots are sent to premium publishers, and they cycle through the sites in order to appear to be the same audience that typically visits those sites. The second way that it happens is most premium publishers, or most publishers in general, buy traffic in one way or another, whether that's paying per click or per visit or even through content recommendation. Unfortunately, bots work their way into the ecosystem through these kind of cost per click or cost per visit chains. So as a result, even though the publisher is trying to take steps to avoid it, that's typically how bots end up on their site.
Okay, great. Thanks. So thank you, Rory and Aaron. That's all we have time for today. But if any of your questions were not answered, we'll be following up with you via email. We'll also be sharing a recording of the webinar in the next few days, so look out for that. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and hope you have a lovely day.